wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today our podcast is called Are You Getting It Right? And what we mean by that is parenthood. Are you getting it right?
This gig.
And what is right?
What is right?
So that's the conversation we want to have today. Before we have that, I'd love to remind you to jump on to nourishingthemother.com.au and sign up to join our tribe, where once a week we'll send you an email with links to everything we've put out in the world so you can pick and choose where you'd love to dive deeper. So nourishingthemother.com.au and drop in your email on the front page. So Bridge, are you getting it right?
I don't know. Are you?
I kind of hope I don't, in a way, honestly.
Yeah.
I think I spent so many years, particularly with my first two, striving for this sense of right and never meeting that bar and just beating myself up.
The perfect parenting paradigm.
Like self-flagellation, mother guilt to the extreme, which perpetuates more self-flagellation, which perpetuates a poorer sense of self, which then continues through into a shitty relationship.
Which becomes poisonous for your relationship.
Yeah, and then it just keeps spiraling downwards. And I think I've clawed myself out of that so many times. And as I've said before in the podcast, having come from a mother wound that I was so desperately running from, and anything that remotely looked like her, I was just, I don't even know what the word is. It made me sick to my stomach. And of course, the more you run from something, the more you run into it. So I had more opportunities of facing my mother within me than what I was ever comfortable with. So, you know, I mean, that's certainly a conversation we can have. But what I realized was, in striving so hard to get it so consciously right, I was missing the presence. I was missing the now, because I was always 5 to 20 years ahead of where I was, going, what will that mean? And if I do this, what will that mean? And I've done this, well, now he's definitely going to be like that.
Which is so clearly parenting out of a wound, isn't it?
Yeah,
You know, like I find it interesting. I follow a number of people who choose to unschool or homeschool. And so, as we know, your void, whatever you perceive was most missing, is what creates the value. And so one of them that I follow was talking about how a moment when she was 6 years old and she was deeply shamed by a teacher, and she decided in that moment she never wanted
her children to be exposed to teachers.
Yeah. You know, and to never have to feel that, and that poor 6-year-old, and how wrong was that. And I really recognize, I mean, I totally align with a lot of her values around, you know, treating children as whole people and worthy of respect and all of that kind of thing, and not using punishments and shame and stuff like that. But I also recognize how much that can become so cyclical, because you're almost looking for evidence for the world around you to not measure up, you know, based on the story that you have about how you were treated, and you're looking for evidence for the world to treat your child like that too, and finding every which way you can to avoid that.
Well, also because you get a redo. If you can find a moment that looks exactly like the pain that you experienced, you get a redo. You get to parent yourself by virtue of parenting your child. So you get to pour on your child all of the love, the words, the connection, the support that you perceive you never experienced. And so you get to heal in a way. So it's also a genius of our psychology. Not only does it fuel our top values, the things most important to our lives, not only do those ripples come out further into our genius, where we're headed in this world, what we expose our children to, but at the same time, we're loving our inner child by doing that. I just find it fascinating.
Which is so interesting, because it really shows that relationship. It's always not only a parenting of your child, but it's a parenting of your inner child. It's a mothering of you, whether you're conscious of it or not, which I think is beautiful. And at the same time, it's wise to bring, you know, a level of consciousness to, if we find ourselves continually in a cycle like that, because it's feedback for us to know, oh, why am I getting so bothered by this particular thing? Or why do I go from 0 to 100 in my anger when that happens with my child? You know, what's that about me there? And, you know, it's such a delicate dance. I think sometimes we don't want to do that, and who can be bothered, and I just want to live. And other times, it's wise for us to start to look at those breadcrumbs that are leading us back to ourselves.
So, where do you want to take the conversation from here? Are we getting it right?
I find it interesting. This morning, I love this idea of kind of who comes into our life, or the synchronicities of who we meet in our day. And this morning I was at it's Sunday, we're recording, and I was at a farmer's market nearby. And it was at the school that my son was going to go to, but he's now doing a Montessori program at a different school. So I really come up against a lot of my decisions that I've made when I go to this school, and I recognize the path that we could have been on and the path that we're on now. And I sit with that desire to judge myself or make myself either right or wrong based on my choices, as opposed to simply just being with my choices and being okay with wherever those choices take us, because we can be so quick to judge ourselves or try and compare our reality to how it could have been, like a sliding doors moment. And I was talking to a mother there who my son had been in with we'd been in a mother's group like when they were like 6 weeks old. And I really realized how much, we're all just facing ourselves through our children, like listening to her talking about, having 2 kids and the different dynamics and what she thought it was going to be like to parent another boy. Oh, they're both the same, just do the same thing. And she was saying it's been really hard because he's just such a different kid, and like what's worked with the first one's not working now. And I think of that too. And I think of how much do we create work for ourselves by trying to mold our children to what we think is right, or what we think is the correct way to behave, or what we think is the right way to do things. And I had this conversation with my husband lately where I said, I think so much of the challenge in parenting is trying to control our children, or trying to have a desired outcome that we want them to fulfill. And whenever they don't fulfill that for us, we have the internal angst and frustration and anger and negative feelings because they're not doing what we think that they should be doing. And that's the crux of it, I think. And it's really tough because we have a set of values that we might want to hold for our family, and we would really like for that to be a collective embodiment of how we all be in the world. But the reality is, the harder we hold on to how we think we should be in the world, the more our children are designed to push those buttons to help us get more comfortable with those edges of resistance that we've got, and that might be perhaps using manners. Like, I know I get triggered when my son wants to retreat within himself and goes really shy, and I take that sometimes as rudeness, where he won't show people appreciation. But I know that, like, that's my stuff and that's society stuff. And so I'm constantly looking to try and find that sweet spot between setting an example of how I would love him when he can to show up in the world, but also recognizing that it's not fair for me to also push that on him as how he should behave, because it's also his experience to make sense of too, and also his experience to make sense of perhaps the feedback that he gets when he is perceived to be rude, and how he has to then work through that. Like, it's not for me to fix his potential pain as a result of somebody perceiving him as rude, because there's a learning in that for him.
Yeah, I totally respect that. But I feel in my body like that's hard to witness sometimes, your child being judged.
Yeah, it really is. Like, you have a visceral reaction to that. And I think we're designed to. It's like that mother bear, like, wanting to kind of, shield them from that on some level. But well, it's about finding that how much do you support and how much do you allow them to feel those natural consequences and find their way of navigating those.
How do you find those sweet spots?
With me, I try as much as I can to continue to ask questions and let him sit with the answers, or come up with the answers, or give me feedback, as opposed to me going into teaching straight away. So it might be, how did you feel when that person said that to you? Yeah, what did you think about that? As opposed to me going, oh, that's really wrong what that person did to you, or that's really wrong how they treated that person. And I turn it around to myself. Yeah, I wonder if it could feel like this for you. I know that, when that happened to me when I was 6, I was really uncomfortable about it, but I thought about it afterwards where that person might have been coming from, you know, what they were trying to do and how maybe it wasn't my fault, or maybe, you know, just to give different ideas and perspectives on how to relate to other people. And I really try to weave in universal laws in our conversations. So, you know, this idea of, you know, when people feel appreciated, they're more willing to cooperate with you. You know, when, you know, a nice way to appreciate people is to say thank you, you know, or, you know, a nice way to help another person feel love in their heart is for you to do things that are thoughtful to them and think about, and, you know, and that show that you care about what they care about. So I try to weave gently those sort of universal principles in, but without me trying to drum into him a way of being with the world, because who am I to say that my way of being in the world is the right way of being in the world? You know, I want him for me to model that for him, but for me to not push that down his throat, you know?
Oh, yeah, I love it. I just am listening to you going, yeah, yeah. Because it doesn't matter how many times you hear this stuff. This is the whole point of having a tribe, right? Because it doesn't matter how many times you hear it. Each time you hear it, there's a new layer for you because you're assuming, you know, we're all on growth, that there's always a different perspective, awareness and meaning that you attach each time you hear the same thing. It's like reading a story or watching a movie at the same time. Or reading a book. You get something different out of it each time. You know, no different to kids like going gangbusters on one movie
and
1,000 times.
1,000 times, yeah.
Is because they're still trying to understand. They haven't done with their learning in it, you know. And this is what I appreciate. Look, just by virtue of hanging out with you, to be honest, Bridge, but in even the fact that we hang out then online with our group as well, is that we're constantly having these conversations, which means it's constantly a value and you're constantly reminded and you constantly take meaning and can extrapolate it out into your life based on someone else's experience, which is just the genius of sharing, well, women's ability to share and storytell, is that we're all taken to some part of ourselves and our own story. And that's just what I was going through. I was just listening to you then thinking, gosh, I could just never hear this enough.
And I think too, you know, in every day our children are taking us to new levels of this. You know, like even them negotiating playground stuff or them negotiating friendships, and, you know, you noticing how you maybe want them to be. And why do I want them to be like that? You know, where's that come from? Or, you know, why do I want them to not do that? And why? Was that because that wasn't okay for me? And am I willing to sit with that belief still? Am I willing to put that onto my child? Or am I willing to kind of sit with the internal angst in me and kind of shift it?
Oh, I'm having like a body feeling as you're saying that.
Because it's awful. Like even on Easter weekend, we were my son is obsessed with presents and he's obsessed with getting things and money. You know, like, so I'm like, what is this for me? Like, there's something in this for me.
You haven't worked that out yet?
I'm still kind of, you know, like sitting on it. Like I kind of
still in question.
Still in question, you know, and I'm not, you know, I don't feel like I need to know the answer, but I'm noticing my triggers in it. And so I'm like, this is about you, not him. This is about you, not him. You know, like when I get triggered about it. And anyway, my brother-in-law, you know, Hugo was so excited because my brother-in-law had a present he was going to bring for him. And it had been Hugo's birthday. And so I thought, oh, maybe they got him one. I don't know. And anyway, the present was some batteries, you know, like just some batteries on the table. And I saw him being given them and I was thinking, oh God, this could go either way. Like he could just melt down because that's not the present he wanted. And I felt that rise up in me because I felt like those moments in my childhood as well. Well, I felt in that moment a culmination of all the feelings that I'd had as a child when I had high hopes and the reality had been dashed. You know, maybe that the adults didn't understand me, or that I wasn't being heard, or that, you know, everything that I had dreamed was just dashed, you know, in the form of this present, you know. And so I really had to at the same time breathe that into me and know that that was my feeling.
So that's what you did. You came back to your breath practice.
Yeah, and just was like, okay, I feel something here. You know, how is this going to play out for him? And it didn't even rate. Like he just was like, oh, cool, batteries for this, you know. So I had put in my head that he was expecting some wrapped up present, you know, but it wasn't the story for him. And it was just an example of, you know, how often we sort of project onto the situation what
our own meaning based on our own experiences, which is the whole point why there's never a reality and why you could never make the same assumption that given the same experience your child will experience the same experience,
which is why there's no right
exactly
wrong, essentially, because one person's right and another person's wrong, and that they bring with to that decision a whole host of decades of stories that lead them to making that decision or having that value.
And in essence, it's perfect, right? As you just touched on then with value, it's perfect that we read the situation or they read the situation that way, because it affirms where they're headed in their life in one or many ways.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of it, that there is no wrong because there is no right. There's only all of us trying to find our expression on a soul-driven level. And equilibrate ourselves on that journey.
Yeah.
Like there's no right or wrong
And
there.
I think, certainly I know that what drives yourself and I is this desire to keep our children connected as much as possible to the essence of themselves, and for them to stay there, not stay there because it's impossible to stay there, but to always
have a base to come back to.
And to perhaps not have the heaviness of the layers of conditioning and the distance between
the subordinations, the shoulds, the belief that we carry like a backpack, assuming that it was always ours, but perhaps it never was.
And the inability to connect with what they're really truly wanting, because for so long they've wanted what other people have wanted for them, because that's how they've been taught to think. And so certainly that's where we lean to, but that ultimately comes from essentially what you and I both experience as voids in different forms. Is this sense of disconnection, this sense of disconnection from our true nature is what gives us the value of deep connection, both with and for our children, to their true nature. And to do that requires us to create that relationship with ourselves of questioning and of taking the breath before we react, and as much as possible choosing to respond to our children in thoughtful ways, as opposed to going on autopilot based on whatever's stored on our movie we're running in our mind about how children should be or how parents should be, and that whole power structure.
We just want to take a moment to talk to you about our aligned parenting program, which has very much been created from both myself and Bridget, from our hearts and our minds, and our years of parenting wisdom, which is very much built upon a foundation of every conscious parenting book that's ever been written, every in-person experience that could possibly have manifested. Yeah, absolutely. And we realised we still got to this point where we had no understanding or deeper insight beyond our children's needs, and we needed to feel into our own bodies and our own minds and our own sense of desire and want in this world as much as within our relationship. And we didn't know where to go beyond children's needs.
And it's a relationship like no other, that parent-child dynamic. It's not something that just comes naturally if we seek to both raise children with strong emotional intelligence and grow as women and mothers and partners and wives.
So what we've done is opened our aligned parenting program up for lifetime access.
Yeah, so that's $197 in one payment, or you can have it in 3 payments of $66. And what that means is that you get instant access to all of our course material, and you'll also go into our private Facebook group with our tribe and another group where we will facilitate bi-monthly live webinars, and we'll also have facilitation with you after those webinars to hash out any conscious parenting dynamic that you find yourself in and where you want to really upskill.
And that's for lifetime. So we really invite you to jump into aligned parenting programming with us, where we really work on creating deeper insight and greater connection within your world.
Part of the transition for us into prep and school and that whole bigger world has had me thinking a lot about, the stages and the edges we find ourselves at, on this parenting path, and how fleeting it can be. And I've had a few conversations with people, including you, Jules, whose kids almost are on that precipice of their social world being far more influential than the home. And, I guess almost on some level the pain that comes with that, as we recognise how limiting, I suppose, our influence is beyond, the tween-teen years. And I guess I want to talk to you on your perspective of this whole idea of getting it right and what that looks like, and how we can get, not even right, get congruent and get aligned with what's true for us in a sea of expert opinion and judgment and clashing beliefs of what everybody else in the outer world thinks is right for your teenager or your child or your, you know, baby?
I don't really know where to start other than I'm a big fan of wisdom that is not wisdom that I have, and I want to know what other wisdom is. Because I know that wisdom is hard earned. It is never easily given. So whatever wisdom parents or people in general have that appear to be ahead of me in time, I'm always fascinated to know what it is. So whenever I meet someone, it wouldn't matter who it was. I am always thinking, what wisdom do you have that I don't have that I can hear from you today?
I love that. Because then that's actually looking then to everybody you meet as a holder of something.
I literally believe that.
Value.
Yeah. And particularly with the work that you and I, Bridge, do in the last couple of years, the more I've been able to see genius expanded, the more I realize that I don't have the cornerstone on everything. I have the cornerstone of genius in these areas of my life that have deep pain associated with them. So the feminine, sexuality and parenthood. Yep, I can talk to the cows come home about that. But aspects outside of that, I don't have the genius zone on that. And yet I was meeting these people who perhaps didn't have genius in the areas that I did. And I thought, what have you got to offer me? And yet they do. And same thing with parents that are ahead of me. And it wouldn't matter if they were considered, if I considered them conscious parents or not, because what I realize is by virtue of being, you know, in a school community now, my son's in grade 6, so he's about to finish primary school. By virtue of being in a primary community, I've been exposed to not my selected group of people. You know, I think when you're in preschool years, you get to define your tribe. And as soon as you hit school, it's the first experience of your kids expanding their own tribe that you don't get to control.
And I think that, and I wonder too, if the more you have a judgment on like the other people, the more your kids are going to make friends with the kids.
No doubt, right? But what I realized through that softening was, and I've said before in many podcasts, that these mums who I would not have consciously sought out, left on my own devices, were divine and had all of this wisdom about parenthood and about the fun and the sense of self that I felt so removed from in my uber conscious getting it right journey. And they have been my greatest teachers of anyone to opening me up to it's okay, like we said before, it's okay to say, today my kid is an asshole and I've had enough. Whereas I could never have said that. And now I can say it and I can laugh about it and I can still love them through that as opposed, and love myself, as opposed to crumbling internally within myself in conflict between the mother I should be and the mother I felt like I was, and all the ways I wasn't measuring up and all the ways I'd clearly fucked him up or her up. And, you know, to be able to just go, Jesus, like this today, too much. I can't deal. Yeah. And to have a space to put back into self, I'm important and my sense of self is important, and tribe and community are, you know, an expansion of how my world rolls with that. So anyway, I can't remember how I've got round to that. How did I get there?
You just in terms of opening up your beliefs and judgment to find a greater set of wisdom.
Right, so wisdom. So what I realise now is that these women who I would never have thought had wisdom that I wanted, indeed had wisdom that I needed. And that was my biggest learning curve in terms of seeing everyone else around me that I previously was a bit like, I don't really, you know, have any desire to spend any time with you two. Wow. What have you got that I don't have that could enhance my life or my children's lives? And I'm willing to sit in my own discomfort long enough and continue to practice opening myself up to you in an energetic kind of heartfelt way to find that. I'm willing to hang in there for that. And 9 times out of 10, I get it. Not like 9 conversations out of every 10 I would glean wisdom from them.
And I love that willingness, right? Because this is like in practice the truth that, you know, you get to choose in every moment what you project onto a situation, what you believe, the thoughts you have, you know, how you relate to people. Like, that's actually a choice that we have. And sometimes we really don't want to have that choice. We want to continue to stay stuck in our story of how, you know, maybe our way's right and their way's wrong, or, you know, stack up all the reasons why perhaps they're doing something better than us. Whereas, you know, when we bring a sense of willingness to honouring both ourselves and what we value and them, you find that middle point, that meeting point of hearts opening and hearts connecting, which is essentially what we all want anyway.
So when it comes to parenting and kids, what I find myself doing is consciously, if I'm at a gathering, well, they don't call them gatherings anymore, Bridget, now they're called gaths.
Gaths?
Gaths. So you don't go to a party, you don't go to a gathering anymore, you go to a gath.
A gath? Oh my God.
So if I'm at a gath, I make sure to hone in on the parents that have kids that are older than mine. And I'm really asking them, you know, how are you going with this? How do you deal with that? What have you found with this? And it doesn't matter whether I agree or don't agree with what they're telling me. It's irrelevant. What I'm listening for is how they've done it and what their experience of that is. And when I meet them with that, there's no agenda, there's no sense of judgment, I'm just curious, how do you do it? And how do you do it? And how do you do it? Because then that's research. Then I can distill the 8 different ways of doing something that I know nothing about and go, I'm going to take a bit of that, and I'm going to take a bit of that, and I'm going to take a bit of that, and here's what I'm going to add to it.
I just think that's reminding me of what it's like when you're in wedding season before you've had your own wedding.
Yes.
And you're looking at everyone else's and you're going, yeah, nah, a little bit of that, not that.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing.
It is.
You know? It's incredibly,
applying it to parenting.
It's incredibly great research.
Yeah. So that's 100% of the time what I do. So before I even start like physically researching, reading books or going to talks, I kind of hone in on what I perceive my weak spots to be. And I only know my weak spots in advance by listening to everybody's stories and listening to my body and going, ooh, don't feel ready there. Or, ooh, don't think I know enough about that.
Yeah.
And so then I take my own conscious research to those areas. But that is an enormous amount of time I spend on that. And there's no mistakes in that. Parenting is a top value of mine. I get huge amounts of wisdom and life meaning by immersing myself in parenting. And therefore, no different to meal planning in advance. If you have a high value on food, I have a high value on parenting. So I'm meal planning ahead of time.
Yes, I love that.
Before I get there, I want to know what I'm doing when I get there. Now, of course, you're not always going to manage that in parenthood, and there's going to be shit that happens and you go, fuck, now I've got to find my toolkit for that now. But where I can, and I know something's coming, such as I am at the precipice of teenagehood and hormones and sex and high school and drugs, and like I'm on that precipice. So I am like absorbing like a mad woman everything that I have there. And, you know, I mean, you and I have had conversations recently, even in our tribe, about, you know, sexuality and teenagehoods and well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there was also a bit of shock from you going, oh my God, I can't believe they're that at that age.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know. This is why I say, and then you and I had this conversation in the car the other night when we were tearing up, when I was saying, I feel like in essence, my job is nearly done with my eldest, who's about to turn 12. In a way, whatever I haven't laid the foundations for now, it's almost too late in a way, because he is about to embark on a world where I am not involved for the first time in high school. Like, there is no parent interaction virtually in high schools at all, as opposed to primary schools where you're really like in there. High school's nothing. You don't know the parents. You don't know the kids. You don't know whose house they're going to necessarily for a party. Wow. You don't know. You're not doing drop-offs and pickups. You're not hanging out in the schoolyard. Like, you are not involved for the largest part. Wow. And whatever is happening in that world, they've got to have a set of resources to deal with. And that includes sexuality, drugs, you know, bullying, the beginnings of adult life. And I'm not there to hold his hand through it. So I kind of feel this responsibility of, fuck, have I given him enough? Have I given him enough that he can handle himself there, when he's plonked there, because he will be plonked in many of those situations and have to find his way out. And not to say, of course, this is also why I think it's hugely important to be there after school in high school years, because I think there's a huge amount that they've got to consolidate and debrief about from their day, depending on what they've been exposed to. I mean, my friends who have siblings just a year or so older than my oldest, this is what I'm hearing, is these conversations are really full on, and the things they're exposed to are really full on. And if you're not around for the opening of those conversations, then you literally have no impact.
And if you also don't make safe those conversations as well.
But this is the groundwork. This is what has already transpired, right? Because you can't spend the whole time going, not listening, not listening, not listening, don't have time, don't tell me, and then go to high school, go, why didn't you tell me? That's not how that works.
It's so true. It's like I think there's that saying that goes, if you don't listen to the little things when they're little, they won't tell you the big things when they're big, which can be really hard, right? When you're juggling the craziness of small people and sometimes the seemingly, mundane things that they think are important and you struggle to find relevant or important. They feel that, and I think about that a lot. I think, I'm got so much going on, and it can be hard to really slow down and be deeply present and be directed.
I don't think it has to be a totality, though. I don't think it has to be all one way or an either or. But I think it is worthwhile sometimes when you're in these early years of parenting that feel like they go on for forever, and sometimes you think you're the only crazy person in the world who gives a shit, is just to take a breath and a moment to go, this is so important. Because I think that's the thing that we struggle with the most as conscious mums who are wanting to pour our hearts, souls, time, money into our children in a way that's not recognised by larger society, because they'll just be right.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what you do.
Is that it is so important, and just to touch in and feel into why that's important for you, I think is a beautiful gift. And now as my son's here and his world is just expanding at a rapid rate, socially, emotionally, physically, just exponential growth. And for the first time, I feel like I'm the wingman. I'm not the captain per se of that journey now. And that hits me with an enormous sense of self-compassion and an enormous sense of purpose for those early years. That this is why. Because he's a magnificent young divine masculine. Magnificent. And that's why. And when they're so little and they're 5 and they're 6 and you're thinking, God, you're just the most divine thing and I want to eat you. Oh, but it's just, you think, oh, I'm just a crazy mum. No, there's purpose, there's reason. There is reason and drive for you diving into that, and to trust that. Because here I am at a point where, I'm so glad that I did,
Yeah.
Because you don't get that time back.
No.
It's gone. And I also know that I was saying to you, Bridget, that was making me upset, was my son is 12, and I know that ever since he was 5, he's wanted to play in the NBA. Now, I'm not saying he's necessarily going to make the NBA, but what he's very dead set focused on is going to college basketball over in the States, which he always has been. I'm not kidding. Since he was 5 or 6, it is the one dogged thing he has continued. I have this recorded painting in my drawer. Those recordable paintings, which, P.S., if you ever get a chance to get them, because I only ever found them once, and only my oldest 2 did them when they were like 4 and 5. They're like canvases, and you can record a 30-second snippet. So they both painted a canvas and recorded a story about their painting.
Oh, gorgeous.
So up on my wall, and they hit them all the time, press play on them, and they're just batteries. And so we have this story that both of them tell about their pain. And this is the most divine thing. And it's these little 5- and 6-year-old voices.
Beautiful.
Oh, it's so gorgeous. Anyway, so even in this painting that he's done when he was like 5 or 6, he's, in the NBA, and he's like, and I just think there's no mistakes either, right? Trust your child's genius. Anyway, I'm going on such a rant and a random tangent. What I realized was that if he has such a desperate desire and drive and focus and purpose to go to the States to play college basketball, I have not a doubt in my mind that he will find a way to do that. Now, that's where he's at now. It may change, but I doubt it, given that it's been happening for the last,
Yeah.
7 years. Yeah. So that leaves me 6, maybe, if I'm lucky, years left with him. Like that's virtually my third child's lifetime, and that feels like a flash. And I also know that it's different to preschool years in that it gets faster and faster. And like once you're on a school train, it like accelerates the further up they get. Time speeds up and they get busier and more social, and they grow at these incredibly rapid rates. And overnight you blink and there's someone different to who you put to bed the night before. And I have this huge, just like my husband and I have spent like a week talking about it, where we were like, fuck, do we even want to spend our money renovating the house? Because we've got 6 years left. Do we want to spend that making memories together and traveling? Or do we want to spend it on a fucking house? And it just, for the first time, put in such perspective how fleeting this is, that by the time we're 18, we've spent 80% of the time we will ever spend with our parents for the rest of our lives. 80% of the time.
Wow.
I have 6 years left. And it just like, I don't even know what that feeling is, but I just feel like it's so precious. And so have I got it right? I hope that he's got enough dysfunction that it makes him funny.
You've got that on your Facebook profile.
It's exactly why I have it there, because I remind myself all the time there is genius in dysfunction. And I want them to be what I want them to be, but I want them to not be that too. And I think I've got it right when they have a home base where they know themselves and they have enough dysfunction that they force me to grow and they find who they are outside of me. I think that is when you get it right. And I just have I hold my breath and, kind of feel like I'm leaping off the great unknown as I have faith and hope that I've put in enough to see him step further and further and further into his own space in the next 6 years, when I will literally then not have any I don't know, captaincy, if that's the word. I won't even be a wingman.
And yet, don't you think you always are?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, but not in the way I think that we perceive that looks like. There's not the same level of influence. And it's harder because they're also, that they're opened up to more and more pain that you can't stop because they are their own person. And I think that's hard too. That is,
and I've been coming to a lot more appreciation and reverence for my own mother as I toy with these ideas, because I think how heart-wrenching it must be when our children hit those new levels of independence, and particularly when we've invested so much of ourselves in who they are, or in how they grow up in our space. And I was having a massive cry after Hugo's first day of school, and my mum said to me, she took me in her arms and she said, "Look, I don't think I ever told you, but when you were 19 and you moved out, I cried for 10 days straight, and I had no idea because I didn't, I was like, woohoo, living my life, whatever." But for my mother, it was like ripping her heart out. And I thought, gosh, this whole mothering journey is so deeply ordinary, but for that is incredibly extraordinary.
Can you tell me about those emotions and where they're coming from?
I'm trying to figure that out right now, actually. I think that I've probably traversed this journey of having my mother on a pedestal, before I had children, and then deciding, no, hang on, that wasn't right to have her on a pedestal. I spent a while putting her in the pit. And I think as my children are growing a little bit older and I'm having to grow alongside that, I'm having a lot more appreciation, and more centeredness, and I think a greater level of love for her. And it just shows how much motherhood just breaks us open. It just breaks us open in every way. And it's supposed to. It's supposed to. And I think we can look so much for the answers outside of us, but all they do is take us further away from ourselves. When the work is to be with yourself first.
I don't think there's anything left to say.
No. I think that's probably the most emotional I've got on a podcast for
I love it.
a long time, yeah.
But how much does that just speak to that just wellspring of love and devotion that is your life purpose? And yet we want to say that it's not for all these reasons. And I just adored this journey that's so ordinary and yet so extraordinary. It's perfection.
Yeah. And when you and I are both tired from our babies and toddlers not sleeping.
Tired.
And I'm like, why can't you fucking sleep? We remember this, right? Yeah. Because you can't keep shooting for the perfection because it's never, the perfection is this discomfort. It is this sleep deprivation. You know, it is the clashing of values and, you know, rage and tears, and it's all of it. Yeah. So
I feel like you have something left to say. What do you want to say?
I've been having these conversations, I think, a bit with my husband because I really would love to have a third, I think, anyway. And he'd be quite happy to be done. He's also nearly 10 years older than me, so I get that. But he'll often make comments like, oh, you know, like when the kids are gone, I'm thinking, why are you even talking about that? Like, I don't want anything else but this. Like, I love this. Like, I fucking hate it some days, but I love it. I don't want to wish this away. You know, and I really...
I love that.
What?
I love this. Like, I fucking hate it, but I really love it. How much is that the human experience?
But it is, you know, like, fuck. And so I've really been sitting with this thing, like, he's only reflecting me. Like, he's only reflecting my level of incongruence around that decision. And around the level of, you know, do I deserve another like really healthy child? And do I deserve more of this? And do I want more of this? And, you know, who am I if I'm more of this? You know, more of kids and chaos and craziness and nappies and sleep deprivation and, you know, what does that look like? You know, I'm really trying to sit with that and honour him, and also know ultimately the more congruent I get, the more he'll go with it. Which also seems like an enormous responsibility as well, to be shaping someone else's life like that. So that was what was in my mind as she was saying, what else am I wanting to say? And I think it's, you know, our world is trying to get us to be more of ourselves, and it's about us leaning into the willingness to find that. And what that looks like with that for us, because it might look like a totally different story to everybody else who's, you know, making decisions for you know, the track that they're on or whatever. But sometimes, you know, as you are finding with this unexpected fourth baby, that sometimes life has other ideas and, you know.
There's enough dysfunction to make you funny.
Yeah. I just love that. That is, I might have
seriously the best e-card ever.
To put that on my like fridge or something. Just remind me.
Seriously. Because it also reminds me to let go of the perfection.
And loosen up.
Yeah. Just like, come on. Some of the best people, well, all of the best people I know have dysfunction in well, we all do anyway.
Yeah.
But seriously, my best friends who I love hanging out with, we're all dysfunctional in some way.
Yeah.
And it's, in essence, the dysfunction is what I love most about them.
Yeah.
You know, and dysfunction makes you fun. Like, to see the world.
And that's the ability to laugh at yourself and laugh at situations. And yeah.
So I plan on giving my children all the love and care that I can possibly muster consciously, and I hope that I give them a sprinkling of dysfunction. I say that now. Let's see what that dysfunction looks like.
Can you choose it? Can you choose it? I don't know. Is there a menu of like the choice of dysfunction? Because I'd like to see that.
Yeah. No, it's just going to hit me with whatever I've got repressed, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Anyway, we would really love to hear from you if this podcast has resonated. You can connect with us on nourishingthemother.com.au. You can email us. You can Facebook or Instagram us at Nourishing the Mother. And connect with you, Bridgie,
in suburbansandcastles.com. And you, Jules?
Is thepleasurenutritionist.com. And I just want to remind you that I have popped up just last week the winter wellness.
Yes.
So that is a guide that I put together. It has an 1.5-hour video tutorial that's broken up into 3 segments on basic winter wellness for your children and your family, how to help kids through that, how to teach kids how to be in that, what to consider for yourselves, and then an essence of how to build your own first aid kit. So just a basic, I'm a big fan of a first aid kit that can just be used in different doses for everyone in the family rather than having something for baby, something for toddler, something for mum. You know, you can use one supplement and just use it differently. So that's what winter wellness is, and I'd love you to check it out. So it, what is that? What have we got that on? We have that on socials, don't we, on Facebook?
Yeah, check it out on social media. It'll be there, and we'll also link to it from the website.
Perfect. So you've got to nourish the mother to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.